tall whites, little green men, aliens, Hyperboreans. Are these beings real, or is it a ruse to prepare the world for a false Messiah? In the last session, we talked about Admiral Byrd's secret mission to Antarctica. Byrd said that there were several nations that had a special interest in the region at the end of World War II. Many of those nations were involved in a secret cover-up to help the villains of the war escape, to include the Roman Catholic Church. We will continue the discussion and provide additional information about the Catholic connection. A link will be in the description for those who have not listened to the message. Let's lay the groundwork here by talking about Thule, as in the Thule Society, and Vril. This is the first element of Nazi occult beliefs was in the mythic land of Hyperborea, Thule. Just as Plato had cited the Egyptian legend of the sunken island of Atlantis, Herodotus mentioned the Egyptian legend of the continent of Hyperborea in the far north. When ice destroyed this ancient land, its people migrated south. Writing in 1679, the Swedish author Olof Rudbeck identified the Atlanteans with the Hyperboreans and located the latter at the North Pole. According to several accounts, Hyperborea split into the islands of Thule or Thule and Ultima Thule, which some people identified with Iceland and Greenland. The second ingredient was the idea of a hollow earth. At the end of the 17th century, the British astronomer Sir Edmund Halley first suggested that the earth was hollow, consisting of 4 concentric spheres. The hollow earth theory fired many people's imaginations, especially with the publication in 1864 of French novelist Jules Verne's Voyage to the Center of the Earth. Soon the concept of vril appeared. In 1871, British novelist Edward Bulwer-Lytton, in The Coming Race, described a superior race, the Vrilia, who lived beneath the earth and planned to conquer the world with vril, a psychokinetic energy. So this energy called vril is what sources say that Adolf and his occultic gang members tapped into, and it helped them make a lot of amazing technological advances. This goes on to say the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche also emphasized the concept of the Übermensch or Superman and began his work called the Antichrist with the line, "Let us see ourselves for what we are." He says, "We are Hyperboreans. We know well enough how we are living off that track." Although Nietzsche never mentioned vril, yet in his posthumously published collection of aphorisms called The Will to Power, he emphasized the role of an internal force for superhuman development. He wrote that the herd, meaning common persons, strives for security within itself through creating morality and rules, whereas the supermen have an internal vital force that drives them to go beyond the herd. That force necessitates and drives them, listen, to lie to the herd in order to remain independent and free from the herd mentality. It says, in the Arctic home of the Vedas, the early advocate of Indian freedom, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, added a further touch by identifying the southern migration of the Thulians with the origin of the Aryan race. Thus, many Germans in the early 20th century believed that they were the descendants of the Aryans who had migrated south from Hyperborea Thule, and who were destined to become the master race of supermen through the power of vril. Hitler was among them. Now let's dig into this because it's time to learn the truth about these supposed alien invasions. This information from Big Think talks about the strange, possibly German origin of UFOs. It says Germany was among the first countries in the world to develop an interest in flying saucers for their strategic significance. It goes on to say one of the strangest photographs from World War II depicts a barely discernible saucer-shaped object flying high above Prague Airport. It was allegedly taken by the inventor Joseph Epp, called in to help engineers get their latest creation off the ground. By the time Epp got to the airport, the device was already up and running, soaring in ways that, though familiar to us now, thanks to sci-fi movies, must have surely looked a little alien back then. Rumors about flying saucers did not emerge until after the war had ended, and there is a surprising reason for that. During the early 1940s, it appears that the Third Reich was putting considerable time, energy, and resources into the development of a new type of aircraft, one that, thanks in part to specialized rotors, would be able to fly not just horizontally like most other planes, but vertically and even diagonally as well. Now let's look at this article. It's saying that German scientists made contact with an alien species as early as the 1920s and were constructing flying discs and conducting space missions by 1942. It says numerous UFO researchers have made a connection between alien beings and such German secret societies as the Thule, the Vril, and the Black Sun. In his controversial seminar, UFO Secrets of the Third Reich, Vladimir Terziski tells of an alien Tudor race that secretly began cooperating with certain German scientists in the late 1920s. The article says anti-gravity research began in Germany in the 1920s with the first hybrid anti-gravity circular craft, the RFZ-1, constructed by the secret Vril Society. It says in 1944 through 1943, a series of anti-gravity machines culminated in a 350-foot-long, cigar-shaped Andromeda space station, which was constructed in old Zeppelin hangars near Berlin, the research and development arm of the SS. So it says Terziski is not alone in making such claims regarding extraterrestrials and German cooperation. Some researchers scoff at them as pure fantasies, but others are convinced that there is a German alien connection. It says we do know that shortly before the Third Reich collapsed in 1945, Werner von Braun, Hermann Oberth, and about 80 other top scientists were smuggled out of Germany by the Allies, who also captured various documents, files, plans, photographs, and designs. At the same time, however, one specific file containing discoid-shaped aircraft and 130 crack German designers of specialized aircraft are said to have disappeared. A UFO researcher, his name is Jamie A. Romey, stated that the mysterious disappearance of the vital file, together with 100 technologists, must be added to the list of oddities that took place shortly before and after the fall of Adolf's group. Among the oddities, researchers cite the following: the unexplained disappearance of several German freight U-boats, the disappearance from Tempelhof Air Base of several long-distance planes with flight plans to Spain and South America, the disappearance of several tens of millions of marks in hard currency gold and precious stones, and the fact that UFOs were and continue to be sighted in great numbers over areas of South America, in which many Nazis and members of secret societies are known to be hidden. Now, this article says scientists are getting serious about UFOs. Here's why. It says understanding what are now called UAPs is crucial for national security and aircraft safety. For millennia, humans have seen inexplicable things in the sky. Some have been beautiful, some have been terrifying, and some, like auroras and solar eclipses, before they were understood scientifically, have been both. Today's aircraft, balloons, drones, satellites, and more only increase the chances of spotting something confounding overhead. In the United States, unidentified flying objects came into the national spotlight in the late 1940s and early 50s, and there's a reason for that. We'll get into it. It says a series of incidents, including a supposedly crashed alien spaceship near Roswell, New Mexico, generated something of an American obsession. So you see this map on the right. A lot of red areas on the map. It says an analysis of nearly 99,000 reported UAP sightings pinpointed U.S. counties with a particularly high number of reports per 10,000 people. That's the reddish area. A low number of reports in the blue areas and an average number in the white area. So the majority of the reports about UFO sightings are happening in those areas which happens to be in close proximity to an airport or military installation. A hint that aircraft may account for many UAPs. We should also add that there is more than likely a military-related factor involved. Now we're going to look at excerpts from this book called Castle Furfenstein and the Wonder Women of Vril. Buckle up for this one. So the author of this book, William Henson, is going to talk about the wonder weapons created by the Germans, and he references Jim Marrs' book, The Rise of the Fourth Reich, and he says Jim Marrs comments that in addition to the Vengeance weapons V1 and V2 rockets, the Germans produced a number of scientific breakthroughs in their quest for weapons technology during World War II. German ingenuity and efficiency appeared capable of overcoming almost any obstacle. So it says technological advances were seen in almost every area. The rate and quality was astounding. Plastics, which only came into general use in the United States during the 1950s, were developed in Germany. Other things like plexiglass, polyethylene, the forerunner of today's plastic baggies, and syringes, nylon, and aldols were produced during wartime in Germany. The largest company was IG Farben, which in 1941 synthesized the opiate methadone and Demerol under the name pethidine. Television, which most Americans did not get to see until the early 1950s, was a highly developed commodity in Germany. In 1939, the German firm Furtz began developing a miniaturized TV system that allowed pilots to guide both bombs and missiles after launching. This system was used in the anti-aircraft rocket Wasserfall. Many of these tests failed, noted author Joseph Farrell, but by the war's end, a successful test of the television-guided TOM missile was conducted by German scientists for the Allies in Berlin, with the target being a photograph of a little girl's face. The test was successful, much to the impressed and doubtless shock of Allied observers. It goes on to say that supersonic rockets, nerve gas, jet aircraft, guided missiles, stealth technology, hardened armor, even flying saucers were just some of the groundbreaking technologies being developed in German laboratories, workshops, hangars, and factories. And now you know where the United States got all that stuff from Germany. It says, from guns firing shells of air to detailed discussions of flying saucers, from beams of sound that were fatal to a man at 50 yards, to guns that fired around corners and others that could see in the dark. The list was awe-inspiring in its variety. Pitt stated that while some German technology was less developed than imagined at the time, some were dangerously near to a completion stage, which could have reversed the war's outcome. It goes on to say that Germany was where quantum mechanics was born. The Germans were looking at gravity and other matters from a different perspective to everyone else. Their developments were pretty impressive, but how did they get the knowledge to develop those things? It came through sorcery. The knowledge came from the fallen angels they call the Shining Ones or Anunnaki. Let's continue. This says the Shining Ones are also described in the Vedic literature. So this is what the Vedic literature says. According to Hindu mythology, heavenly beings came to earth in the distant past. These deities lived among humans and they possessed various flying machines. The humans are said to be descendants of a race called the Devas, which literally means the Shining Ones. These human survivors were of a forgotten civilization, of a race of, this is how they were described, tall, white-skinned, red or blonde-haired people. Now, the author is going to refer to the passage in the book of Enoch regarding the birth of Noah. And he says the story is also found in the Dead Sea Scrolls mentioning the Shining Ones. The passage he's referring to is about how Noah's father, Lamech, was afraid when his son Noah was born. He said Noah was strange, that he was not like other men when he was born. Why was he saying that? He was born with white skin. He had locks, described as woolly hair, and by all accounts, Noah was an albino. But when his father went to Methuselah, he was expressing his concerns because he thought that the baby had been fathered by one of the angels. So then this is telling you what the children of the fallen would have looked like. He said the child is different from and unlike man. Obviously then, Lamech and his family had melanated skin. So the Nephilim, or the giants, had white skin. And that lines up with the stories that the Native Americans shared about the giants. They said the same thing. They were tall giants, and they had white skin with red or blonde hair. So Enoch did confirm for Lamech that Noah was indeed his son. Now the last part of this says the Shining Ones were non-human and they were giants. They were a group of alien astronauts who arrived on Earth and seeded life many thousands of years ago. We know that they didn't seed all of life. Lamech was able to distinguish those who were the seed of the fallen from those who were the seed of Adam based on the phenotype. So yes, those descendants of the fallen who mated with the daughters of men were identified by their appearance. They had certain features, and now they refer to them as the tall whites. Listen to what it says here. The reason why race had become such a strange issue in occult circles was simple. Occultists such as Liebenfels, who believed in the existence of super beings, also believed that such super beings could be bred. Now, if you remember in a previous session, we talked about the German Lebensborn breeding program that began in 1935. It says later the contention of the founder of Mormonism, Joseph Smith, and the author refers to Joseph Smith as a Freemason. He says Joseph Smith said that men could become gods through celestial marriage. Mormon theologians declared that those who were not of the Anglo-Saxon race were ineligible for the priesthood and ultimate deification. So only Anglo-Saxons could become gods according to Joseph Smith. It says they had little contact with Jews and so concentrated their attention upon Negroes and other colored races. The principle was the same. The message had come through that there was a connection between race and spirituality. It says this was not a new idea. So they're going to point to the Old Testament to say that the idea of a chosen race close to God, endemic of, and they use Jewish here, but they're referring to the Israelite spirituality. And it says, further inspection of the New Testament will show that Christianity's much vaunted condemnation of the racial principle was mainly motivated by the fact that Paul, Apostle Paul, failing to convert the Jews to his newfangled mystery religion, rather than accept defeat, abandoned the idea of racial exclusivity, much to the annoyance of most of the apostles who were the real bearers of the message of the Jesus of Nazareth. Pause and think on that. Now, I'm going to read this portion that talks about the vril. It says Edward Bulwer Lytton's 1871 novel about the coming race, which was later reprinted as Vril, the Power of the Coming Race. It says somewhere the Nazis picked up this idea and revived it. The author says, as an example, read these lines. It says, I arrived at the conviction that this people, speaking about the Hyperboreans, though originally not only of our human race, but as seems to me clear by the roots of their language, descended from the same ancestors as the great Aryan family, from which in varied streams has flowed the dominant civilization of the world, and having, according to their myths and their history, passed through phases of society familiar to ourselves, had yet now developed into a distinct species, with which it was impossible that any community in the upper world could amalgamate, and that if they ever emerged from these nether recesses into the light of day, they would, according to their own traditional persuasions of their ultimate destiny, destroy and replace our existent varieties of man. Just pause and think on that. It says, but the darkest side of the vril was their propensity for sacrifice, the young ones. I have to be careful how I say this so they won't take this down, but you can read it and see what it says here. I alluded to this in the previous session, that this is the connection between church and state. They want the young and the innocent, and this points back to the Babylonian religions. They want innocent, pure blood. So it says at the height of their power in the 1920s, hundreds of children disappeared in Munich. This is how they get their power and information from the powers of darkness. This is key. It says many are presumed to have been erased by the cult to summon up vril energy. This may seem like an outlandish claim, but when you consider what these people went on to do in the Third Reich, it seems almost tame. Adolf and the secret satanic cult central to the Vril Society was searching for a German Messiah who would lead the Aryans to world domination, and they want to erase all other races, especially the Jews. Again, you can see what's written here. It says this rise was predicted by a spirit, let's call it what it was, an evil spirit, calling itself the beast of the book of Revelation in a seance attended by the cult followers. The beast is said to have proclaimed that a man named Hitler would seize the spear of destiny and lead the Aryans to power. And within a few weeks, a fiery young man of shabby appearance began attending the Thule Society meetings. His name was, you guessed it. Some of you may have heard the reports about the remains of children being found at Catholic facilities over the years. Why? This article from America says over 600 bodies found at another Catholic school for indigenous children in Canada. This was in 2021. Folks, there is a dark and evil underpinning of the Roman Catholic Church, and it's not a coincidence that they played a significant role in helping the evil masterminds escape at the end of World War II. This NBC article says Ireland investigates alleged discovery of 800 remains in sewer tank. Look at the title. Babies. The article says the home was run by nuns, and it sparked calls for accountability from government and Catholic Church officials. Folks, these cases are usually swept under the rug, or the victims are silenced. This says the discovery revealed a darker past in Ireland, a country often haunted by its history of abuse within powerful church institutions. So what's really going on in the orphanages? Now let's go back to the book. Now it's talking about the Thule Society, and you see the image on the left. It's showing the folks who were present at an NZ party in 1925. The man everyone loves to hate was there, and guess who else? Aleister Crowley, the Satanist, who was also a Freemason. This says we come now to the mythology that has grown up around the Arctic homeland in the 20th century, fed by the dual currents of esotericism and scientific theory. For all their admiration of the tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Nordic Aryans, most of the NZ leaders and Adolf himself were of the darker, shorter physique, typical of Alpine and Central Europe. The Nordic physique was seen as the ultimate aristocratic ideal, as the result of 100 years of science and pseudoscience which had begun and ended by placing the cradle of the master race in the north. So it says one of the hallmarks of the master race philosophy is that no one is known to have embraced it who does not consider himself a member of that race. So this evil group, led by Adolf himself, wanted to create what's called a spiritual community called Huldah. Now listen to what Sabotendorf, the one who defined the ultimate goal of the German Orden, says about this community. He says this temple of Huldah is simultaneously spiritual and material. It belongs to earth and to heaven, to the past and the future. It is the Hyperborean equivalent of the Ark of the Covenant of the Israelites. Huldah in Sabbatendorf's mind far surpasses that Second Reich which Wilhelm's Germany had incarnated since 1871. It is the empire of all the Germans. Those who live between the Rhine and the Vistula, between the Baltic and the Alps, are only the heart of an immense territory inhabited by other heirs of ancient Thule. To this Huldah belong not only the Germans, but also many other Europeans, the Scandinavians, faithful to their Nordic origins, the Netherlanders, more German than the Germans, the British, divided between Celts and Saxons, the French, heirs of the Franks and regenerated by the Normans or the Burgundians, the Italians, in whose veins runs the blood of the Lombards, the Spanish, who still carry many an imprint of the Visigoths, and also the Russians, whose country was founded by the Swedish Varegs, those Vikings of the rivers and steppes. So it says toward the end of World War I, when German defeat was inevitable, Sabbatendorf was in Munich organizing a Bavarian branch of German Indorden. A friend of his, Walter Nabas, who was an artist and also involved in the occult, suggested a new name for the order, the Thule Society. Supposedly this is where the name comes from. So it says the ceremonial foundation of the group took place on August 17, 1918, and its emblem was a dagger, its blade wreathed in oak leaves with a curved armed swastika around the hilt, emitting rays of light. Now pay close attention and you're going to see that their war is really with us. It says, at the very eve of the armistice on November 9, 1918, Sabbatendorf exhorted the Thuleans to fight for Germanic and Aryan ideals, not against the British or French victors, but against, listen, our deadly enemy Judah. Just wrap your brain around that. They are saying their deadly enemy is really Judah. He said, fight until the swastika rises victoriously out of the icy darkness. So in 1964, Dietrich Bronder gives the names of 16 members of the Thule Society. Most of these Thule men, he says, had become Catholics. Here we go again with the Catholic connection. But listen, 7 had Ish origins or relations. Now they're talking about the Rev 29ers, those who say they are us. But let's just pause there. Don't they hate the Ish folks? But here you see earlier they called Judah their deadly enemy. Yet they had 7 members of the Rev 29ers in the group, and this is where it can be confusing if you don't understand that this word is often used interchangeably for the true descendants and those who say they are us. The 7 members of Ish origin are from the Rev 29er group, not the people they called Judah, their true enemy. Let me go back to something we covered in a previous session, and it will make it clear that they're really talking about us as being their true enemy. This comes from the book Arctos, the Polar Myth. It says, Landig's Thuleans, as is only to be expected, have their shadow or their enemy He identifies their enemy as Israel. It says their rivalry goes back far into prehistoric times to an interregnum, or to a period during which the Nordic Atlanteans were enslaved by black magicians of Semitic origin. Black magicians of Semitic origin? It then references Fabre d'Olivet on the temporary enslavement of the Boreal race by the blacks, and Spencer's enslavement of the Aryans by the Turanians. Then it says something about the black Israelites. It says they have a tendency to migrate to places north and west of Israel, and it embodies a nostalgia, a folk memory of the time of their dominance, and a desire to once more rule from the north, says SS officer Gutman. They called them black magicians because the Most High gave our ancestors the power to defeat the Nephilim. So understand that when they use that word ish, they're not always referring to the Rev 29 folks. You have to dig deeper to see who they're really talking about. The masterminds behind the scenes know the difference and how to identify the true descendants of Israel. Now let's go back to this. It says in Germany at the turn of the century, and particularly after World War I, many secret societies developed. One of these groups was the Vril Society. In 1917, 4 members of the Vril Society met in a cafe in Vienna. There was 1 woman and 3 men. The woman was a spiritual medium. She was a witch, like the witch of Endor in 1 Samuel 28. It says they met under a veil of mystery and secrecy. They discussed secret revelations, the coming of the new age, the spear of destiny, the magical violet black stone, and making contact with ancient peoples and distant worlds. Their source of power, they claim, was the black sun, an infinite beam of light which, though invisible to the human eye, exists in antimatter. And what are they doing at CERN? Studying antimatter. This is from their site. It says the antiproton decelerator is a unique machine that produces low energy antiprotons for studies of antimatter and creates anti-atoms. It says the Vril emblem became the black sun, a secret philosophy thousands of years old, and provided the foundation on which the occult practitioners of the Third Reich would later build. If it's thousands of years old, then that's telling us where it came from, Babylon. It goes on to say that the black sun symbol can be found in many Babylonian and Syrian places of worship. They depicted the black sun, the Godhead's inner light, in the form of a cross. It says this was not much different from the German Knight's Cross. The woman allegedly channeled information from aliens or demons, after which the Thule Society was created. They went on to build various UFOs called the Vril machines. This is information we need to know, particularly as they are having these UFO talks in Washington, and folks are reporting these sightings around the world. We need to have a basic understanding of what we're looking at. It says the Thule Society members were allegedly the first group to attempt the back engineering of an extraterrestrial spacecraft. A German writer, John von Helsing, describes the discovery of a crashed saucer in the Black Forest in 1936 and says that this technology was taken and combined with the information the Vril Society had received through channeling. They're getting the information through sorcery. It goes on to talk about how both Thule and Vril disc were built from 1939 to 1945. They had produced a series of large discs, while the Vril series were more concerned with resuming channeled flight. By 1944, the Vril Geist channeled flight disc was achieved, as well as a huge 139-meter long cylindrical mothership called the Andromeda device. This is an image of what that Andromeda device looked like. Here you have images of the German Honnerbau 3 Astoria and something called the Geist Spirit. These are the things that people are seeing. They've been making changes and upgrades to these things, but this basic information was stolen from the Germans, and we know where they got it from. There were various news articles talking about flying disc. Here's one on the left. It says it's a column from the Mirror dated March 24th, 1950. This is one of the earliest English references to German flying disc. And then on the right is Dr. Belluso's obituary dated May 22nd, 1952 from the New York Times, which again mentions German flying disc. They call this one the Glock, or the bell. It says the effects of the bell when in operation lived up to this odd list of extreme precautions, giving off both short-term and long-term effects, and perhaps also those about which we do not know. With the respect to the short-term effects, these became immediately perceptible after the power had been switched on. These were a characteristic sound, which could be described as something extremely similar to the humming of bees sealed in a bottle. Hence the unofficial name, the hive, was also used in relation to the bell, as well as a series of electromagnetic effects. These consisted of the following: surges in surrounding 220-volt bulbs, observed in the case of ground tests at distances exceeding 100 meters. Also, a bluish phosphorescence or a blue glow around this bell, obviously a result of the emission of ionizing radiation, it says, as well as a very strong magnetic field mentioned in the statements. In addition, participants of the experiments felt disturbances of the nervous system's operation, such as formication, or they described it as pins and needles, feeling pins and needles, headaches, and a metallic taste in the mouth. Clearly, the bell's operation induced some very odd and very extreme effects, and as many readers recognize, the metallic taste in the mouth of participants is one characteristic associated with those who come into close proximity to UFOs. Now listen, it says, when victorious troops took over Berlin, the first reports out of the beleaguered city were that this guy on the right supposedly took his own life in his bunker along with his wife Eva Braun, whom he had married just before the fall of Berlin. Now listen to this part. Their bodies were supposedly removed by trusted friends to the courtyard and drenched with gasoline. And someone lit a match. Are you buying that? It says this version of what happened was circulated through the entire world, but Allied intelligence soon disclosed that the story was a hoax. Stories began to circulate about his survival almost immediately, with various theories being offered for how he escaped and where he went. It says, It is a fact that his body was never found, and it is also a fact that one of his doubles was really the victim and placed in the bunker to be discovered later by Russian troops. It is also a fact, it says, that the skull fragment that the Russians have is not a section of Adolf's skull because DNA testing showed that it belonged to a female. So what happened? Is there corroboration of the 1964 Police Gazette article that Adolf was indeed somewhere in Argentina? Is what the author is asking. He says the answer to that question, unfortunately, is yes. So this guy here was their boy. They didn't want to find him. So then what did Admiral Byrd really see when he went to Antarctica? Why did he say that the beings who took control of his plane had a slight Nordic or Germanic accent? Join me next time for the rest of the story. If this message has been a blessing to you, please remember to hit the like and share it. You're also welcome to subscribe if you have not already done so. We normally upload messages on Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Yah willing. Join me next time.